experience of big city corruption and the highs, lows, and pitfalls of trying to do the right thing. Our own Rotary president, Mr. Jerry Oliver, his law enforcement career includes serving as assistant chief here in Phoenix, and then chief of police in Pasadena, California, Memphis, Tennessee, Richmond, Virginia, and finally Detroit, Michigan. Hired by Mayor Kwame Kilpatrick at the onset of his first term, Jerry was charged in fixing the corruption in the police force in a generational corrupt city. Joining him today is Megan Norris, chair of the managing directors of the International Law Practice of Miller, Canfield, Paddock, and Stone, where she specializes in employment, litigation defense, and labor relations. Details of her career are highlighted in the Rotaryzonian. A few highlights of her community involvement include serving on the Board of Trustees of Wesleyan University, the Board of Trustees of Wayne State University Episcopal Chaplaincy, President of the Board of Whittier School of Theology, and relative to today's presentation, Chair of the Detroit Board of Police Commissioners. May I have you two join us on the stage?
Thank you, Connie. On Monday, November 19th, 2001, it was an early morning executive staff meeting. I had about 10 or 12 of the top commanders within the Richmond Police Department around the table. And we were preparing for Thanksgiving that Thursday, the Thanksgiving holiday, which is a really big holiday. It's everywhere, but it's a big holiday in Richmond, Virginia. Richmond being the cradle of the Confederacy, we had some issues and we were trying to work them through. And as I was sitting there talking to the staff, my assistant, her name is Dot Reynolds. And someday if I ever write a book, I'm going to devote a couple of chapters to Dot, just to Dot alone. Because she was the typical, not even typical, atypical Southern belle who had a super Southern accent. So she came in, tipped into the meeting and whispered in my ear, "Chief, do you know somebody by the name of Malik Kilpatrick?" I said, "Who?" She said, "Do you know the name of somebody named, he's a mayor-elect and from Detroit, and his name is Kwame Malik Kilpatrick. Do you know him?" I said, "No." And she said, "Well, he's on the phone. He wants to talk to you." So at that point, I had been in Richmond for more than 7 years, 7 fruitful years. When Courtney was introducing me, she had mentioned that I was chief in a number of different cities before I came to Richmond, and we had enjoyed great success in Richmond. We had a national reputation at this point of reducing crime, especially violent crime. We took what was one of the nation's top murder cities. It was the #1 murder city in the country in 1995, and we reduced crime by 40% overall and homicides by 60% within the time frame that I was there. We had obtained some notoriety. Project Exile, which many of you may have heard about, along with Helen Fahey and a guy by the name of James Comey, my partners in getting this done. Some of you may know that James Comey was just confirmed by the Senate as the head of the FBI. So he was my partner back in 1995-96 timeframe when we put this together. We implemented programs called Blitz to Bloom, a program called Vanquish, which was a gang-related program that cleared drug sales off of many of the corners in Virginia. In other words, we had obtained some national publicity, honestly, and I had spent quite a bit of time in the White House with Bill Clinton, the president of this country at the time, who was very, very interested in something called the 100,000 cops that he was busy, that program that he was busy trying to implement during that period of time. I was also a speaker at the U.S. Conference of Mayors, which gave me a visibility to talk about something that just happened a few months before, and that was 9/11. So we talked about that, and of course we wound up on a number of news shows and television interviews and so forth. So it was a lot of notoriety in my position as the police chief in Richmond, Virginia. So I took the phone call. I tipped out, went in, took the phone call from Mayor-elect Kwame Kilpatrick, and he told me that on the phone, "Hey, Chief, you don't know me. I don't know if you've ever heard of me or not, but an executive search firm has brought you to my attention. And I have received endorsements from the Chief of Police in Los Angeles and Chicago that you're the right man for this job. I've read about you in the magazines, saw you in the newspapers, heard about you being with Bill Clinton, all that, President Bill Clinton. You are the right person for the job." That was the beginning of the relationship that I had with the mayor of Detroit. We met twice in Richmond. He flew down to Richmond, he and his chief of staff, who at this point he was not in office yet, but even before then, his chief of staff, Christine Beatty, which Megan might mention in her presentation, and I flew to Detroit a couple times. And so right after Christmas, we shook hands and really consummated a deal for a contract, 4 years that I was supposed to spend in Richmond, Virginia, in Detroit, building a world-class police department. I had a contract. It was very lucrative, actually, which made Felicia happy. And so off we went, and I became, on February 1st of 2002, I became the chief of the 7th largest police department in the country. And again, with a mission of creating a world-class police department. It was a daunting task. So let me just tell you really quickly what I found when I arrived in Detroit. And many of you are from Detroit and from the Detroit area or from Michigan, so you know something about this. Detroit was once a very proud police department. It was a leading police department in this country. In the early 70s, I had an opportunity to go to Detroit as a sergeant with the Phoenix Police Department to sit on an assessment center. And at that point, it was the place to go. People were going, it was kind of like the mecca of policing, to go to Detroit and to see what was going on. It's a big city, lots going on, a lot of vibrancy. And so I found it was in a time warp. That when I got there, they weren't even using computers. This was not the olden days. This was like in 2002, that they were still using teletypes and blotters. You know what that is? Blotters are the big books that you see sometimes in the movies, the old movies, where they bring in some guy and they're about to arrest him, and you got a sergeant sitting on a really high desk or something, and he turns these pages. That's what they were doing in Detroit when I arrived there. They had a blotter system, and they used teletypes. Why weren't they using computers? Oh, they had computers on their desk, but no one bothered to hook them up to the servers. And so they just had them sitting on their desk. True story. The top brass were all politically appointed people by the last several mayors. It was a top-heavy structure, lots of ranks, ranks that we didn't even have within the Phoenix Police Department. Inspectors and deputies to this and a deputy to that. We had 4,163 police officers, and about 25 to 30% of those officers were in inside jobs or on light duty. We had a budget of $368 million, and it had been totally mismanaged. Crumbling headquarter building, the building that was built, actually designed by Frank Lloyd Wright many, many years ago, 1300 Bowlby, and they had movies about this building, was in shambles. It was crumbling. In fact, we closed the 3 top floors of the building when I arrived there, and because we just had lunch, I won't tell you why, but it was that bad. Five thin-skinned unions that had a death grip on the police department, on all the policies and the protocols. We had an ongoing United States Justice Department investigation into police use of force. Detroit police officer, here's an example. Detroit police officer Eugene Brown, who was very famous. Brown had killed 3 people and wounded a 4th person in 9 different police shootings. And he was on the promotional list for sergeant. Exorbitant judgments against the police department, millions of dollars going out in settlements, a poorly managed police property room, $5 million in drugs and other confiscated values disappeared within the property room in the short time before we got there. There was racial strife within the department and outside the department in the city, dysfunctional oversight of the police department, sometimes by the police commission and others. And then there was this something that people would always tell me, the Detroit way. You're not doing it the Detroit way. And so what was that? Okay, well, the Detroit way was an attitude. I thought it was a corrosive attitude, doing whatever it takes to get over and to get by. Whatever was expedient, cheating or cutting corners were almost expected. When I arrived there in my office, I was approached by some of the other undercover police officers that did a lot of drug search warrants and so forth. And they came to me in the first weeks that I were there and asked me what kind of furniture did I want in my office. Because when they served the search warrants, they would then seize whatever it is that the chief wanted for his office. I mean, and as a guy, I'm going to tell you, as a guy who grew up in Phoenix, I had to pick up myself off the floor a couple of times after these kind of conversations, because I thought I was being, the kids say I'm being punked. Right. That's what I thought was happening. I started looking for the cameras. So that's what we found. The assets that we brought to the conversation, though, the assets that we brought in, because I knew I couldn't do it by myself. On the first, literally, on the first day, we had the president of the Police Foundation and his research staff join us. The president of Police Executive Research Forum and his staff was there to join us and to do whatever it is that we needed to have them to do. The Deputy Chief, Elsie Scott, Dr. Elsie Scott, who was the Deputy Chief in New York for training, who had stepped down in New York, came to work with us in Detroit to reorganize our whole training bureau. The Deputy Commonwealth's Attorney from Richmond, Virginia, came with us to help rewrite policies and procedures. The Assistant Chief for Investigation and Professional Standards, we talked about Tim Black, Debbie's husband, came along, moved from Phoenix. She hasn't forgiven me for that yet, but he came from Phoenix to Detroit with me to oversee investigations and internal affairs, really professional standards. We moved it up a notch to professional standards. We brought in professionals to do testing and promotions. We even included journalists. We had our own journalists within the organization to document every move that we were making at the time, which was very important. We worked with the newspapers and the media there to try to tell our story. And more importantly, we brought in the lawyers from the Justice Department to negotiate the consent decrees that we had. The only way we could get past some of the union blockage and obstacles and death grip was to have consent decrees signed by Detroit government and signed by the police department. And we promoted the brightest and the sharpest that were among the ranks. This happened all within the first 6 or 8 months that we were there. Now, not to go any further than that, Megan Norris, this young lady that's sitting here, who I admire greatly, was the vice chairman of the police commission, and that's the group that the police chief works with, sometimes work for, to get things done. And as I mentioned earlier, it was my view that the police commission had not been effective, had not been the kind of commission, the oversight that the police department needed. And it was just one of the many, many things that were going on in Detroit that I thought were broken. My statement after I was there for a little while is that Detroit is not the end of the world, but you can see the end of the world from Detroit. It was one of those kind of feelings that you get when you get there. But Megan, and the reason why I asked Megan to join us is because Megan still lives there. She was there before I got there. She was there during the time I was there. In fact, she became the chair of the police commission while I was there. Someone that I could greatly start to respect for her resolve, for her independence, and Megan's advocacy for the police department's professionalism. I mean, she was one of the people that I could turn to, that I would always know that even in the heat of battle, and there was lots of battles going on, I mean, we could spend weeks talking about the battles that we were having, I could always count on Megan to be not supportive, but objective, and she would make the right calls. And so I've asked Megan to join us and to add to the story. Megan Norris.
Really happy to be here, and I really thank Jerry for inviting me. He did not tell me when he invited me who your last week's speaker was, and I have to admit I might have turned down the invitation if I had known I would be following Sandra Day O'Connor, but there you have it. So I came on the police commission just less than a year before Jerry became chief, so I was relatively new to the commission myself. So it all started really in 2000. The Detroit Free Press did a big series after about 4 months of research entitled Detroit Police, Lethal Force, Lasting Questions. And at the time, Detroit was #1 in the country's largest cities for the rate of homicides. I'm going to use the word homicides, others will not. Homicides committed by police officers, in other words, police fatal shootings. We averaged over 10 shootings, fatal shootings, per year by our police. That was 3 times the number in New York City, a much larger police department, 2 times the number in LA, and in the months in 2000 leading up to this series of articles, we had had 6 fatal shootings by police, including a deaf man with a rake on a porch that people were afraid to approach because he could hit them with the rake, and so they shot him dead, and an elderly woman with a knife who they had no use of less than lethal force that didn't require getting right up to the person, and if you got right up to her, she could stab you, and so they shot her dead. So these articles came out, and the articles told us that at least $127 million had been spent on lawsuits in the last 12 years due to poor risk management in the police department. Now I say at least because the city of Detroit kept no records whatsoever of how much had been spent on these lawsuits. And so the Detroit Free Press just went through all the court files and found as many cases as they could against the city involving police issues, and then went through those files and tried to figure out what the settlements were and added it up to $127 million. But I think it's fair to say that that was an understatement. There was no comprehensive risk management program in place at all, and the Free Press found that there were very biased investigations whenever there were police shootings. The police officer's word was golden. Witnesses who could tell you something to the contrary were ignored. There was no scientific testing of any kind. And I'll tell you that more recently, our entire forensic laboratory was shut down, and we have criminals suing for their release because the laboratory tests under which they were convicted were all found to have been falsified. Big, big problem. So the reaction at the time was that then Mayor Dennis Archer asked the Department of Justice to investigate the Detroit Police Department. And this was really saying, we can't fix it ourselves, please come in. That's really what he did. And between the time the articles came out and the time Mayor Archer did that, there were 2 more fatal shootings by police officers. So the DPD came in and they were asked to look at several things. They were asked to look at fatal shootings, investigate all the fatal shootings by the officers in the last 5 years, look at the investigation procedures, to look at how the department was working with other law enforcement agencies in the community, to make recommendations regarding some of the individual officers who were involved in questionable use of deadly force, such as Eugene Brown. And then later this was expanded to look at arrest and detention issues because it was clear that the department was doing warrantless arrests without probable cause. Basically what they would do is if there was a dead body, they'd just literally like get the paddy wagon and round up everybody there and take them down and hold them. No reason to believe they were necessarily suspects or anything. They'd round up the family members of suspects. They'd do whatever they wanted to do. And so that looked into it. And I will tell you, and you'll hear me say this again repeatedly, there was not public outrage to the shootings. There was public outrage to the idea of the mayor of the city of Detroit inviting the Department of Justice into Detroit to look into the shootings. It might be a big problem, but it was our problem. And how dare we ask anybody to come look into it and help us. It's the Detroit way, yeah, indeed. So Mayor Archer did a couple of things. First, he moved the investigations of these shootings from homicide, because often it was homicide people involved. He moved it out of homicide and into internal affairs, and he elevated the level of oversight of internal affairs. And then the police commission also took some actions. One is, before my time, the police commission had actually instituted a policy that there would be video cameras in all the cars. So that was the policy, there'd be video cameras in all cars, and then you could tell what's actually going on with the police. I can tell you as someone who worked on the investigations while I was a police commissioner, there was not one camera ever working on any plane where there was a complaint, ever. It wasn't turned on, it was faulty, wasn't functioning, it was lost, but there was never a videotape to be found. The other thing we did is we attempted to deny the promotion of Eugene Brown. So the police commission, which is one of the oldest and most powerful on paper police commissions in the country for civilian oversight, we set policy jointly with the chief. We heard disciplinary appeals, we had to approve all promotions, and we oversaw all investigations of complaints against police officers that didn't rise to the level of criminal activity. If it was criminal activity or potential criminal activity, it went to internal affairs, but otherwise the police commission looked at it. And so we voted to deny the promotion of Eugene Brown. He had shot 3 people dead, he had discharged his gun 9 times. There are many officers who never discharged their gun in their entire careers as police officers. And he was a thug, and we voted not to promote him. He went to arbitration and he won, and he got his promotion. Why? Because there was a past practice in writing, you're going to love this, that you could not consider disciplinary record in deciding promotions. You could not consider a disciplinary record in promotions. If the guy did well on the promotional exam and he had the seniority, it's a promotion. Right. So, too fast. Wow. Yeah, exactly. So, Kwame gets elected mayor, then he takes office. Jerry Oliver is appointed chief, and Jerry tries to do a few things. One is, he makes risk management a real issue. He makes risk management something we're going to focus on. He made training a real issue. He brought in Dr. Elsie Peck. He made training a significant portion of what we were doing. He created a training bureau. He created a force investigation unit. He instituted a promotional exams procedure for the higher level people, and the unions fought this. Now, any of you who are in management and work with unions, this is going to sound crazy to you, but we had a commanders union. Commanders were unionized. And their union clearly said, your commander position is at will of the chief. I mean, it's not a just cause or anything. You can be booted out of the commander position anytime. Chief gets to decide who the commanders are. So when the chief decided, I'm actually going to have a promotional process for commanders as opposed to just picking the guys I like, the union objected. Because that's not the way we've done it. It's not the Detroit way. Right. Jerry worked with the commission. The commission had never been allowed to sit at the bargaining table, but the commission sets policy. Well, half the policy comes out through the bargaining table. So Jerry worked with the commission on what do you want at the bargaining table. And we said we want to be able to consider discipline in promotions. So he worked for that, and he started to explore alternative uses of force. This was a huge issue because our guys had their guns and they didn't have much else to work with. And policing is a hard job, and sometimes you have to use force, but you've got to have something less than a gun unless you intend to kill a person. I mean, that's just how it really works. You know, it's only in the movies do they shoot them in the big toe to just hobble them. That's not how they're trained. That's not what they're supposed to do. So you've got to have something else. We didn't have what I'm going to call billy clubs. I don't know what they call them anymore. We didn't have those because we had had a police beating. And the man had died. And the only reason we didn't have the kind of outrage that they had in LA with Rodney King is it was black people involved, and so it didn't have the racial overtones that the Rodney King issue had. But we got rid of the batons because we killed people with those. So Jerry was looking at tasers. So his idea was, we'll have a big public meeting. Police commissions have big public meetings. We'll have a big public meeting, and we're going to have a demonstration. So guess who got tased? Jerry and I got tased. My husband still doesn't quite understand why we did that, but anyway, we got tased. To demonstrate to the public, like, this is something you could use instead of a gun. They had, like, gym mats for us. So we got tased, we fell to the ground, that was the demonstration. Huge public outcry. You have gym mats. That guy that you're going to be tasing when he's running down the street, he's not going to have a gym mat, and he might break his arm. Yep, he might. He sure could. But you know what? He won't be dead. Right? He won't be dead. It's fair to say the taser plan died that day. Died that day. again. And there went away, you know, one possible alternative use of force. So, Jerry mentioned the consent decrees. We went through this stuff with the Department of Justice. The Department of Justice and the city enter into 2 consent decrees in January of 2003. The first one was conditions of confinement. This is like your holding cells, you know, those sorts of things. And it was a 2-year consent decree. And the way it was written was, you've got 1 year to get in compliance, and then you have to stay in compliance for a year. So at the end of 2 years, you should be done with this. But you really got a 1-year kind of timetable to get done what you need to get done. The other was the use of force and arrest and witness detention. That was a 5-year consent decree, which means 3 years to comply, 2 years to maintain your compliance. You're done in 5 years. So we should have been done with the first one in January of 2004. We should have been done with the second one in January 2003. Preview of things to come in a few minutes. It is now, what, September of 2013? We're under 2 consent decrees, and we're not in the compliance phase of either one of them yet. We'll talk more about that in a minute. So these consent decrees had common elements. First, you have to fix your policies. Once you fix your policies, you have to train up your people on those policies. Once you train up your people, you have to implement them. Then you have to have a comprehensive risk management system to make sure you're not falling down anywhere, and you have to audit, and you have to monitor. So Jerry and the police commission, at this point, we were working pretty well together. I think at first Jerry thought that we thought he worked for us, and he thought he didn't, and the answer was somewhere in between. But by this point, we were pretty happy together because the mayor was over there. So it was pretty clear to us where the alliances were going to be at this point. So Jerry took the chief of staff, Christine Beattie, the mayor's chief of staff who oversaw police issues. He took her and me here to Phoenix. He was here for a major cities chiefs conference, and he brought us and he set up for us a whole bunch of tours of the Phoenix Police Department. So things like we went to the property room. The property room, the Phoenix Police Department, is off somewhere in this very sanitized place, and you go in with a badge thing that says that you went in, and it's very quiet, and it's very clean, and you could, you know, roller skate around it. There's a lot of space, and then if you go into the area where there are drugs, there's a separate thing, and there's cameras, and there's stuff, and it's just there. I've been in the property room in the city of Detroit. I did not understand this facility. Property room in the city of Detroit, you walk in, and it looks like your garage multiplied by 5 when you haven't had a car in it since 10 years ago. I mean, it was just stacked, you know, rows of just guns, just lying out, guns, you know, next to bicycles, next to, you know, whatever. And then you went into a room, you didn't have to ask what it was because you opened it up, you could smell what it was. That was the drug room, right? And there was no security. There was no way to know who went in and who went out. There was no, I mean, that was the property room. One of the things in Detroit is that people said, we need more officers, we need more officers, we need more officers. Jerry told you we had over 4,000 officers. We need more. The Phoenix Police Department had far fewer officers like if you did it per capita by population, far fewer. If you looked at the geography, far fewer. The problem wasn't that we didn't have enough officers. It was that because of the unions, we had no flexibility in what they would do. We were really constrained in how you could move people around. He then took us out, a whole bunch of us. Tim Black, I think, went with us. Elsie went with us. And the mayor and Christine Beattie went with us. And my memory, Jerry, is that we flew coach on Northwest into LA. They took a different flight. They flew first class. We stayed at the LA Downtown Marriott, right by the LAPD. And they stayed at the Beverly Hills Four Seasons. That's what I remember. At the time, I was too naive to fully understand all of it, but I learned. So we went out to meet with the LAPD. Why? Because the LAPD had a very similar consent decree to our use of force. They were under a consent decree. And they were attacking this consent decree. There's no other way to describe it. They had a command center, and it had things all over the walls, and every police officer in the department, when they turned on a computer, a number would come up, and that was the countdown to the number of days in which they had to be in compliance. Not the end of the consent decree, but the compliance. And that's what they were working towards. And they gave us all kinds of information about how they were doing this and what they were doing to get into compliance, and this was great. The other thing that we did is we actually successfully implemented the policies that we needed to implement to be in compliance, because that's something the chief and the police commission could do. We didn't need a whole lot of help to do that. He had a team of people that worked on the policies, we worked on the policies, and we passed them. Meanwhile, the mayor and city council, first thing they did is they went to court and objected to the whole thing, all of it, saying, we don't have any money, so we can't do this. They had just signed it. The ink was not dry. The court said, here's the paragraph in it that says it's your responsibility to get it done no matter what. So that fell on deaf ears. Then they failed to provide any resources for staffing compliance, for auditing, for doing any of those things. More recently, since Jerry's time, and Jerry may not know this, they actually went to court and said, once we have the policies, we are in compliance. It is not our obligation to actually implement and comply with the policies. Just having the policies would be good enough. The judge didn't go for that. There is still to this moment no comprehensive risk management system. And the other thing they did is they removed the police commission employee who oversaw the investigations. They replaced a lawyer who had clerked for a Supreme Court justice in Michigan. They replaced her with a guy who did not have a college degree, but who was very well connected with the right people. Why? To make sure we weren't investigating the mayor's team. And we'll talk more about that. So, all of this is going on, and May 2003, we learned that Gary Brown has been terminated by the police department. Gary Brown was one of Jerry's top guys. It didn't start that way. I don't think they liked each other first very much. Jerry's never acknowledged that, but I'll just say that. But Gary did really well in the promotional exam. Jerry was committed to the promotional process, and he promoted Gary, and Gary bought into the Jerry Oliver program. He lock, stock, and barrel, he bought into it. They were working hand in hand to get things done, and it shows up all of a sudden in the paper. He's been fired. So I sent Jerry an email to Jerry, if you fired Gary Brown, I'm sure you had a good reason for it, but if you didn't, I'm really sorry. Something must be really wrong, because for the top guy to get fired and the chief not to do it, that would not be a good sign, right? Email I got back from Jerry Oliver, don't send any more emails. Let's have lunch. That was it. He chose the place for lunch. Those of you that are over my age probably remember Flip Wilson. We met in the booth in the back, in the corner, in the dark. We met where no mayor's people would see us. And Jerry said, I did not fire him. They called me in and said, you're going to go fire him.
Let me jump back in.
Yep, you please do.
Let me jump back in on this, because we're talking about Gary Brown because it was that moment where the line was drawn in Detroit. Gary Brown, we had gone through this process of promoting the top people, running off people that weren't so good. And Gary Brown is today he's working for the emergency manager there. Very bright, sharp young guy that we promoted, and he was working with Tim. He worked for Tim Black, Debbie's husband. He was in charge of professional standards, internal affairs. And so one late Friday afternoon in April, I get a phone call from the mayor's office to come to our office. Now, there had been some, I would say some rubs between myself and the mayor's office in a lot of areas. And like I said, we can't go into all of it. We could, but we just don't have the time.
It'll be a long day.
It'll be a long day. But I had said no as the police chief to the mayor on several occasions on some things that he wanted to do. So I get the phone call, and so me and my crew, we go over to the mayor's office as late as 5:30 on a Friday in April, and Christine Beatty, which is the mayor's chief of staff, who ultimately, and I'm sure you probably mentioned it, and ultimately the mayor and Christine had a thing going. That's what caused them to part of the unraveling. Gary Brown was the guy that they wanted to talk to me about, and so when I walked into the mayor's office, the two of them were sitting there, and they said, we want you to fire Gary Brown. Now, I can't, in all the police departments that I'd ever been in, the mayor or someone else like in Phoenix would never have the audacity to come to the police chief and say, fire somebody down within the ranks. The police chief is, if you don't like what's going on in the police department, you fire me. You do not fire my people. So they said, hey, tell you what, we want Gary Brown out of here. And so I said, why? And they said, you don't understand Detroit. You don't understand the Detroit way, but Gary has to be gone. And so, a long story made short, when I was leaving, Christine Beatty, the chief of staff, said, Chief, what's wrong with your face? And I said, what's wrong with my face is that this is the worst decision that you ever make. Because not telling me, and then firing Gary Brown underneath me, and then leaving me out to try to explain why Gary Brown is fired, it's going to be a long day. It's going to unravel.
Yep. So, Gary Brown, it turns out, was investigating a complaint that had been made against the mayor and his executive protection unit. Normally, your executive protection unit would be some of your top officers, professional people who work well with the public. The mayor's executive protection unit was made up of his high school buddies on the force who all had disciplinary records. And he didn't want them investigated, and he didn't want himself investigated. And so, Gary Brown files a whistleblower lawsuit. Several months later, Jerry resigns, Elsie Scott leaves shortly thereafter, and then we have several years of just ridiculousness, and I won't bore you with it, but the mayor is using the police department to get Escalades for his family. There's just lots and lots of stuff going on. Gary Brown's case goes to trial, and he wins $6.5 million. And several months later, the settlement, he gets attorney fees for winning, so the settlement is $8.4 million. And the argument is, you know, we were going to lose anyway, we might as well just agree to the attorney fees and be done with it, and that's what they did. Then in January 2008, I got a call from a reporter who covered the police department, said, turn on your computer, check the webpage. I turned on my computer, I checked the webpage, and I saw then what everybody else in Detroit saw the next morning. Text messages showed that the mayor had lied in the trial. He had lied about two things. One is he had said he didn't fire Gary Brown. Well, he did, and they have plenty of emails between him and Christine Beatty talking about how they were going to deal with Gary Brown. But he had also been asked questions in the trial about his relationship with Christine. And he had gotten very indignant and accused the lawyer of impugning women and suggesting that the only way women advance is to sleep their way to the top. And he took on this big feministy thing. Well, the text messages left no doubt what was going on between the mayor and Christine. I mean, it was detailed. It was porn. They couldn't all be printed in the paper. In essence, right? So then, and we're going to go through some slides fairly quickly, but this is the beginning of the silly season. I don't know how else to describe it. Every day there was a new headline, and every 3 or 4 days there was really a new breaking event, and this went on for a very long time. So, March 25th, the mayor was charged with perjury. Much to his dismay, the case got assigned to a district court judge who had some guts. Never been happening before in Detroit. I'm sure the mayor didn't think it was going to happen now, but it happened. The charges were later amended to include obstruction of justice. More text messages came out. Many more text messages came out. The way the first ones came out is apparently that's how the case settled. Gary Brown's lawyer handed the mayor's lawyer an envelope because settlement discussions are going nowhere. He opened the envelope, the text messages were inside, they walked back in and settled it. And then they lied to everybody and their uncle, including the courts, about the settlement. And what that meant is that a number of lawyers in Detroit, who really were fine lawyers, but who worked for the law department and were under the direction of the mayor, lost their licenses or got disciplined for lying about that whole process. The mayor was very cocky. The prosecutor's case is going to hell. 2 days later, new probe run in with officers. They were serving a subpoena at his sister's house. He was on the porch. He shoved one of the officers. You don't shove police officers. Bad things happen when you shove new police officers. He was charged with new felonies. And then if you look at the bottom of this one, unauthorized trip to Windsor puts Kilpatrick behind bars. Windsor is the city, the Canadian city to our south, actually. And he'd gone across the border, which violated the terms of his bail, and so he actually had to spend a night in jail while he was the mayor. So we're like, our mayor is in jail right now. He's in jail. It's just bizarre. So by October of 2008, he has pled guilty, and I was asked when I was coming here if I would have video. We could have our O.J. White Bronco moment here. The entire city stared at their computer screens for hours watching kabuki theater in the courtroom while he like flirted with people and high-fived people and did everything waiting to plead guilty to perjury, obstruction of justice, pled no contest to the assault charges, resigned as mayor. And he was sentenced to 99 days. It's not a huge sentence. Except then he didn't pay his restitution, so they sent him to jail for a year, which meant prison. It was a year and a day, so he had to go to Jackson Prison. Then, in August 2012, the feds indicted him. And this is an investigation that had been going on forever about corruption, bribery, extortion, conspiracy. Everybody knew what was happening, but they'd never been touched, and we really were shocked. But everybody said, the feds, he can't buy off the feds. He doesn't have any ins with the feds. And on March of this year, he was convicted of 24 4 of the felony counts. He's awaiting sentencing, and the judge has not let him out of jail during the sentencing because she believes there's more money out there and he's going to go get it. Well, this has had a huge effect on the police department. So by July of 2009, the city had spent more than $10 million on the monitoring process, and we were only 39% of reforms complete. Remember, we were supposed to be done by 2004 and then in compliance through 2006. By 2009, we'd spent more than $10 million and we were only 39% compliance. The federal judge said it was grossly inadequate. He expressed extreme displeasure. And then shortly thereafter, the court announced that the monitor was resigning. Why? She had, according to text messages that the feds had provided him, had inappropriate contact with the mayor and a relationship inconsistent with her monitoring duties. In other words, we weren't in compliance, but she was sleeping with him and she was not requiring us to do anything to get in compliance. Yes, that's it. That's it. And there's a specific assignation that the mayor had that was documented. He had a couple's massage with someone, not his wife, but no one knew who it was. It's now believed, based on geographically where it was, that it was with the monitor. She had registered as Carmen Slowski. My daughter, who at the time was 14, that's the name of the turtle in the dial-up commercial. Slowski, right? That's what they registered for. We now have a new monitor and we're up to 91% compliance. That's really quite amazing under the circumstances. Except now we are in bankruptcy and we have no money. So what's going to happen with that? So all right, Jerry, we're 3 minutes over, but I think we're up for questions now.
All right, so I'm going to start with the first obvious question, which is, did you ever feel your lives have been in danger during this process?
Did you feel your life?
I'm going to tell a story, and the answer is that that's strongly worded, but during a 5-week span while I was the chair of the police commission, I've lived in the city of Detroit for 27 years, our house was broken into 4 times, and I had an armed robbery. And other people suggested to me that those might all be related to the positions that I took publicly in the police department. I don't know that. What I know is the police department got its badge back and it's got its ID back, and I didn't get my stuff back. And that was a very unsettling feeling. That suggested to me that somebody knew where to go to get the stuff back and then left me alone.
Yeah, both my wife and I both had security teams. 6 or 7 officers that were assigned to us 24/7 while we were there. And one of the reasons why we were happy to leave is because I don't know how presidents and other people do it, but to have somebody with you continuously 24/7 will wear you out. And for Felicia and our boys, they were the same guys who were dancing around here not long ago, were just little babies, and everywhere they went, they had to have security. That's one. The other thing is that because of the fights with the unions, and that everybody within the union, including my security detail, we were worried that the security detail that was in our house in the middle of the night, because they were there 24/7. In our house, we had a space in the near the kitchen that was designed for the security team to be there in our house with us while we slept. And it was just, did we feel like that we were in trouble? Part of the reason why Felicia said, in February, I'm going to be back in Phoenix. Where are you going to be? And because we had security. And
Part of it was February, and Felicia did not like Michigan winter.
She didn't like the snow.
Jerry, you and I both talked about this a lot. I ran a company in Detroit while I was mayor, president of a private sector company that was the backup of the Public Works Department. So I had the opportunity to meet the mayor. What they haven't said is he was probably one of the most charming, imposing, capable people that I've ever met in my life. Yeah. Honestly.
Really?
So I fully understand. But when in the process did you realize you were part of the problem and not part of the solution?
That's a really great question. If the mayor, if he walked into this room right now, knowing everything that you know about him, you would still like him. He is the most charismatic young guy. He was 31 years old when he hired me. And we got along great. He's younger than my son. when my oldest son, so I was giving him like advice and that kind of thing. He's very charismatic. The problem is, when I knew it wasn't going to work, I think it's the red navigator. Mm-hmm. That he called me up one day on the phone and said, "Hey Chief, my wife would like to have a red Ford Navigator. Beautiful car, all decked out." I said, "Great." He says, "And I want you to buy it on the on the police department's contract with Ford Motor Company." And we got all kinds of cars. By the way, when you're there in Detroit, you get cars free. I mean, cars is not a big deal. So
they do cars in Detroit.
yeah, they do cars in Detroit. So when I arrived there, they gave us, Ford Motor Company gave us 2 cars that they're going to destroy when we left. But they gave us 2 cars, one for my wife and her security team, and one for me and my security team. So I didn't understand why he just didn't ask for one, but they would not do a luxury car like a red Navigator and give it to the mayor. So the mayor wanted me to buy it. And I said no. He said, "Well, I want you to buy it on the police contract." And I said, "No, I'm not doing that." I said, "What you can do," because see, I had a reputation of being a pretty good guy before I got there, and I could just see the handwriting on the wall. I said, "This is a setup." So I said, "No. You send me a check for $25,000, which is the base cost of a Ford of a Navigator, and I will buy it through the contract. We will deposit the check." And it was a silence on the other end of the phone, and eventually a click. The relationship that we had from that point on started to change. There's a lot of things happened, but that was the
subsequent chief, who was best friends with Christine VID, and whose husband played poker with the mayor, got the Navigator.
Yeah, the mayor got the Navigator with the next chief after me. Not me. Yeah.
I'd like to ask a question at the citizen level. Does the mafia exist in Detroit, number one? And the other side of it is tell us about the strength of the gangs and what is being done about it.
Yeah, to my knowledge, we have no active mafia presence in Detroit. We've had mafia people in the region who have lived there, like in the burbs, but their activities haven't been in Michigan. Their activities have been someplace else. We do have gangs, but we don't have gangs like LA has gangs or like Chicago has gangs. We have wannabe gangs. And we have something, the police department called the gang squad, which works with them. But really, it's more punks, is a better way to put it, than what you think of as like what you watch in the movies, the LA kind of gangs.
Yeah, the police department was a gang when I was there. Go ahead, Ann.
We've heard about the mayor, and it's been, secondhand, thirdhand information all over the world, except for in Detroit. But we never really heard outside of the illicit and provocative behavior between Christine VID and the mayor. What is the status of her? What was she actually charged with?
Christine was charged with perjury and obstruction of justice at the same time the mayor was. And she pled guilty as well. Her sentence was comparable to his 99-day sentence. She has since been paying her restitution. The mayor has not. She has been religiously paying her restitution. And in fact, the prosecutor really holds her up as sort of the poster child for, a life turned around. She was, by all accounts, in love with the mayor. And the mayor, she served her purposes for him, and then he was through with her. And he cut his own deals without regard to her. She had never turned on him. And once she realized that, she was really through. She no longer lives in Detroit. She got a job down south. She moved down south with her children. But she had left her husband for the mayor, really, to further that relationship. And so she went down south, and she's working down south. And she's filed for bankruptcy down south, but she sends a restitution check in every single month.
Last question, one more.
Yeah, I'd like to know how you stay uncorrupt in an entirely corrupt environment.
You get out. I mentioned at the outset that we signed a 4-year contract. It was a contract not only with the police department or with the city, but with the big 3 auto people. So my deal was with business people as well as the city. And when we saw, as I said earlier, when we saw that it was not going well, and that the people that actually brought us there, Megan and I talked about this last night. I really think that the reason why the mayor hired me is for cover. He wanted someone that had a great reputation, that was that could come in and rebuild the police department, but not. He thought that we would never turn and look at him or look at the administration or look at corruption as it existed in other places, not just in the police department. And so when we started to look, Gary Brown started to look at him from an internal affairs standpoint and some of the things that they were doing that were either illegal or corrupt, that's when the whole support thing that we had, even for the police commission, and Megan didn't get a chance to talk about all the moves that were made in the police commission to control that, that's when we decided that it was time for us to go. So that's kind of a snippet anyway, guys. That's kind of a snippet of what happened in Detroit, and I want to thank Megan for coming out. Megan, she's still my source of information, what's going on in Detroit, and plus a couple of the reporters. I hear from reporters all the time, and then they call me and say, hey, Chief, what do you think about this, or what do you think about that? Because they're still on the case back there. There's still lots going on in Detroit, and God bless them, because there are a lot of good people in Detroit. Some of them are in this room that are from Detroit, good place to be from right now. But it's, you know, it's too bad for the good people there, that the bankruptcy and the problems that that's going to cause, and with pensions and all of that. But anyway, that's kind of a little snippet of what's going on. So I want to thank everybody, again, the program committee, for allowing us to have that opportunity. The 50-50 raffle, we better hurry up and do that before we're completely out of time.
All right, part of the 50-50 raffle, our largest drawing today is going to be for $66. Megan, if you would select a number.
Get your tickets out.
745520. 520.
Who was right in front of me?
Oh, there we go. And we got a winner. Good
All
job.
right.
Great. All right.
Okay, so next week we have another great program. As you know, it will be the continuation of our Religions of the World series. Buddhism is the subject. If there's any other announcements, no unreadiness. Sunshine is the best disinfectant. With your smile and with your kindness, go bring sunshine into someone else's life. This adjourns the 4,987th meeting of Phoenix Rotary 100.